to this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network, and joining us via Zoom once again, Brian Glyn Williams is a professor at UMass Dartmouth and seems to come on the show when we need him to sort of explain things that are going on around the world. And there's lots of it to talk about right now. And we're going to talk about the conflict right now in Israel, the war in Israel, really, and Gaza. Brian, thanks for joining us, and thanks for trying to simplify this for people who might not understand what's going on.
My pleasure as always, Jim. Sad that it happens to be wars that brings us together, but delighted to be here with you again.
I thank you. I think at the start, I think it's a good idea. You're familiar with the area. Tell me a little bit about, describe the lay of the land, if you will, for people who might not know.
Okay, so I think the starting point goes back to the creation of the modern state of Israel. A lot of people might not know this, but the Romans destroyed Israel back in 700s, late first century of 100 years of AD, and they exiled the Jews across the world. But in the 20th century and late 19th century, Jews began emigrating back to a land that for almost 2,000 years had been inhabited by indigenous Palestinians. Those Palestinians were Christians, but later converted to Islam. And they began to sort of coalesce in the territory of Palestine when Palestine was ruled by the Muslim Ottoman Turkish Empire in the late 1800s, early 20th century. They dreamed of recreating the old biblical state of King David and King Solomon. And eventually they did that. When the Ottoman Empire fell apart, they began creating Israel. And in 1948, they fought a war against the indigenous Muslim and Christian Palestinians, mainly Muslim, and won the war in 1948 and created the state of Israel and pushed the Palestinians out of their ancestral lands, their mosques, their farms, their cemeteries, their orchards, pushed them into two small zones. One small zone was called the West Bank, over on the west bank of the Jordan River, and a smaller zone was called the Gaza Strip. In the process of conquering the Palestinians, the newly created state of Israel expelled them in what the Palestinians call al-Nakba, the disaster. About 700,000 Palestinians were expelled to the West Bank and to the Gaza Strip. And today the Gaza Strip is one of the most highly packed, highly inhabited areas in the world, about twice the size of Washington, D.C., a little small strip of 140 square miles with about 2.3 million people living there.
Right. And again, Israel territory, I mean, we're not talking about, when you talk about the West Bank and you talk about the Gaza Strip, you talk about Israel, you're not talking about a huge amount of land anyway, for when you're looking at everything there.
Right. I remember driving from the southern border of Israel up to the Golan Heights. It's like driving across the state of Connecticut. Israel's a small country too.
Right.
It's 9 million people.
And again, when you're looking at the combination of the population from all these three areas, there's a lot of people concentrated in as you said, the size of Connecticut, in a small area.
Right. And to compound matters, you have the holy sites. That is the real bone of contention here. You have the holy sites in Jerusalem. Of course, Christians believe it's holy because Jesus was sacrificed there and then came back to life. Jews believe in Jerusalem because that's where they had their temple. The Temple Mount is still there, and the Wailing Wall where they pray. And Muslims believe it is a site where the Prophet Muhammad leapt to heaven on a horse, and they have their third holiest mosque, known as Al-Aqsa, the Holy, built right there. So it's really overlapping three Venn diagrams. And it is that sort of religious tension that leads to a lot of these violence and problems between the Palestinians, Muslim Palestinians, and the Jewish Israelis.
And that's really, I think, when you really come down to it in that small of an area, when you're talking about the religion, you're right, that seems to be the tensions, seems to be the root of just so many issues that are taking place in that particular area of the Middle East.
Right. Those Islamic tensions with Jews, but also the fact that the Palestinians are victims. In Gaza, they've been squeezed into what's called the largest outdoor prison. And to compound matters, they voted 45%, I believe, 44%, I think, to bring in a Islamic group known as Hamas back in 2006. And Hamas declared war on Israel as charter declares annihilation of Israel. So they did themselves no favors. And now Hamas is waging a jihad of extermination against the state of Israel.
Talk a little, the attack that we're talking about obviously happened October 7th. And it's obviously been going on. We've had thousands killed and injured. Tell us a little bit about just the start. Why is, as you're looking at the factions that we're dealing with here, what is Hamas?
So Hamas is an offshoot of what's known as the Muslim Brotherhood. The Muslim Brotherhood was a group created in Egypt back in the 1920s when it was ruled by the British, calling for a return to Islam. Hamas was established in the Gaza Strip. It's called the Islamic Resistance. And they took over the Gaza Strip in 2006, 2007, and banned any more elections and began a war, mainly using homemade, almost basement-made Katyusha rockets to launch into Israel and terrorize Israelis living in settlements near the Gaza Strip, in nearby kibbutzes and towns like Ashkelon or Sderot. So their charter calls for extermination of Israel, and they've been fighting against Israel, even though the Palestinians living on the West Bank, the larger group of Palestinians under the control of a separate group known as the Palestinian Authority, they tended to make more peace. But Hamas is still waging war with Israel, and they've been planning this attack for about 2 years, ever since they saw Muslims being attacked in the Al-Aqsa Mosque, the third holiest spot in Islam, by Jewish authorities. They've been planning their revenge, and of course they launched it on October 7th, and it was the greatest intelligence failure in Israeli history. It was a failure of imagination of the sort we experienced on 9/11. No one in the American CIA or FBI or NSA predicted Al-Qaeda would fly jet airplanes filled with J-2 jet fuel and human beings into the side of packed buildings and redefine the word hijacking. And nobody in the Israeli Mossad or Shin Bet, their intelligence units, or the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, predicted a massive scale on this level involving thousands of rockets and between 1,500 and 2,500 Hamas Al-Aqsa fighters penetrating these walls and raiding Israel directly.
What is the dynamic between Hamas and Palestine, though? I'm curious about that because, as you said, there are those Palestinians on the West Bank, but still Palestinians that do want peace and sort of work with Israel too to try to maintain a peace.
Yeah, we've had polls taken in the Gaza Strip, this condensed, small, packed room of suffering and misery, showing that over 50% of Palestinians living in the Gaza Strip believe that they don't want Hamas in power anymore. 71% of Gazans, Palestinians living in Gaza, think that Hamas does not allow political dialogue or openness. So there is a large population in the Gaza Strip that realizes one thing, which is very true. Hamas does not do what's best for the people of Gaza. The people of Gaza have suffered terribly. In 2014, Hamas launched a series of attacks into Israel. They kidnapped 3 Israeli citizens, and Israel invaded this small area and inflicted thousands of deaths on the Gazans. So the people of Gaza know that their masters, Gaza's rulers, Hamas, aren't really doing what's best for them. This attack into Israel, known as Al-Aqsa flood, just brought down the wrath of Israel on the civilians living in Gaza. They're the ones who are dying. I think it's 1,500 dead Gazans now, and about 1,200 dead Israelis. I'm not doing moral equivalency. What Hamas did was an act of barbarity, rape, mass murder, killing babies, burning women. It was almost like ISIS. But there are people in Gaza who are innocent, including the fact that over 50% of the population of this small, almost outdoor prison camp are under the age of 18. You have 5-year-olds, 7-year-olds, 10-year-olds, and they're dying just the way children were massacred by these Hamas terrorists in these villages and a concert, a supernova concert in neighboring Israel.
Why is there tension, or was there tension? And you described it, that the Palestinians obviously do have concerns about Hamas. Is there any, I don't want to say threat, but is there any, are the Palestinians going to fight Hamas then, in a sense? Because in a sense, they've brought on they've brought on the conflict, whether Palestinians wanted it or not.
Believe it or not, Palestinians did fight Hamas, and they lost. Back in 2006, Hamas won an election, not the majority, but a plurality, and they won control of Gaza. And the other Palestinian group, known as the Palestinian Authority, the group that rules the West Bank, the larger area, under President Mohammed Abbas, and previously under Yasser Arafat, the larger Palestinian group, the Palestinian Authority, fought gun battles in the streets of Gaza with Hamas, and they lost by 2007. So I think the chances of a resistance rising up in Gaza now against these Hamas terrorists who don't care about their own people's safety, their own people's future, who can consign them to this blockade where they have Palestinians in Gaza no longer have electricity or water or food or a hospital.
There's no way to get in or out of Gaza right now. They've blocked. Israel has destroyed the entrances. You can't get in or out, from my understanding.
Yes, so the people of Gaza are suffering under their Hamas rulers, and of course, there's a portion of that population that strongly support Hamas. They're willing to cut their own nose and their ears off to spite Israel. But polls show that they're a minority. The only hope, I think, is somehow that the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, can go in there and do what Benjamin Netanyahu, who brought much of this trouble down on himself, the president of Israel, as I explain later, did, is to go in there and somehow root them out. It can be done. Urban warfare is always a dicey proposition, because it mitigates the power of tanks and a superior air force or artillery, as we saw in the Battle of Fallujah in Iraq in 2004.
Why did Hamas attack at that time, at that place? Obviously you talked about the intelligence failure, but why then?
And that is a question I've been asking myself ever since waking up on that Saturday morning and hearing this horrific news. And the answer is multi-layered. On one level, it was taking advantages of tensions inside Israel. Over the last couple of years, the right-wing president of Israel, President Benjamin Netanyahu, has created a really strong right-wing coalition, including lots of fundamentalist Orthodox nationalists who dream of cleansing Palestinian Muslims from the West Bank, expanding Jewish settlements there, and fulfilling their messianic vision from the Bible. This has infuriated the secular, moderate Israelis who want peace with the Palestinians. Benjamin Netanyahu has also tried dismantling much of the power of the Supreme Court and increasing his power. And this has led to the largest protest in Israeli history. Hundreds of thousands of Israelis every weekend have come out to protest. For weeks, correct. All summer long, you may recall, Jim, that there's been the downtown Jerusalem and Tel Aviv have been packed with anti-Netanyahu protesters who don't like him cozying up with these extreme fundamentalist Jewish parties like Shas, which take their cues from the Bible. And these extreme Orthodox Jews won't even serve in the army. So there's a lot of tension going on in Israel right now, so much so that reservists who will be serving in the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, have stopped reporting to duty, in the Air Force too. So Hamas is keenly aware of these tensions inside Israel, created by Israel's right-wing leader, Benjamin Netanyahu, the president. Also, Hamas is keenly aware of the fact that under the Biden administration's coaxing and Trump administration, Israel was creating peace with the richest of all the Arab nations, Saudi Arabia. They were going to endorse a peace treaty probably this fall. But if Hamas could attack Israel and launch a sort of overreaction on the part of Israel, and Al Jazeera Arabic News shows images of dead Palestinian babies and mosques on fire and women running for their lives, this will infuriate the Saudi Muslim population who identify with the Palestinian Arabs, and it will scupper, dismantle any attempts by Israel and Saudi Arabia to create a lasting peace of the sort we saw created between Israel and Egypt under Menachem Begin, Jimmy Carter's help, and Arafat back in 1979. And finally, there's the fact that last Friday, was a 50th year anniversary of the other great big surprise attack on Israel, the 1973 Yom Kippur War, in which Egypt and Syria blindsided and attacked Israel in an attempt to destroy it. So they based it on history, 50-year anniversary, trying to prevent this peace treaty between Saudi Arabia and Israel, and take advantage of the fact that Israel was riven with this almost civil war, stronger than the civil war between Democrats and Republicans in America. And also, it was a Shabbat, a Saturday. Many Israelis who are Orthodox don't use their telephones because they can't use electronic devices. So it was a perfect Venn diagram overlap of four things.
Let me ask you, one of the things that the attack did, though, was, at least temporarily, it has united Israelis. They have formed a temporary government to deal with this war.
Yes, you're correct. As we saw after 9/11, when George Bush Jr.'s poll ratings went to 92%, the largest in American history. When you have an external enemy, it does bring warring factions together in the country. And Benny Gates, who's a sharp critic, a secular, moderate, middle of the road politician, has made a wartime government with his arch rival, Benjamin Netanyahu. So the Israelis are coalescing around this struggle. Netanyahu has called up over 300,000 reservists to be drafted for war. And the population is unified in their shock and their horror at the images of these 1,200 Israelis who were butchered, beheaded, set on fire, massacred, and the over 100 Israelis who were dragged off into unimaginable slavery as hostages in these underground tunnels, probably hidden away, warned away in that misery hole of Gaza.
Two questions. First, and I know we've got about 10 minutes or so left here. One of the things I wanted to ask is why the failure of intelligence? Do we know that? I know there's going to be an investigation. The Israeli government has said that there will be an investigation. But it just seems, because with the reputation that the Israeli intelligence agencies have, this was extraordinarily such a failure by them.
It was a massive failure. And it led to the greatest invasion and attack on Israel in its history, the darkest day for Jews since the Holocaust. My read of it, based upon carefully analyzing reports from Israel and military analysis, is that the Israelis relied too much on high tech. They developed an anti-missile system known as Iron Dome, made up of lots of anti-rocket sensors that can shoot up in the air and destroy incoming missiles. That system failed because it only can handle about 12 missiles at a time. The Gazan Hamas group overwhelmed it with over 4,000 Katyusha rockets and mortars. They just rained down on Israel. Second of all, the Israelis rely upon something else called the Iron Wall, which is a high-tech wall built around the Gaza Strip with all these sensors and automatic machine guns, remote control machine guns, and drones and towers. And the Hamas destroyed this system. They managed to blow up the towers and cut off this high-tech system, so the Israelis didn't know what was happening. They relied too much on what we call technical intelligence, instead of human intelligence. And when they broke down that network of cellular towers that were controlling this whole iron wall defense, they were able to get these bulldozers and break through the wall and send in this massive attack force. And the Israelis had no idea, no way to monitor it. And they were able to pour in and attack a wide range of villages, overwhelm one base where they had all the commanders, and kill the commanders. So they knocked off the leadership, and the troops had no leadership control. They had no ability to actually monitor how far and wide these groups are ranging, much deeper than we thought. Invading over 22 villages and hitting this concert where they killed over 230 people. The Supernova sort of outdoor psychedelic concert. They also got one kibbutz, Kafar Azaz, and killed over 200 people. And what shocks me, I've been there in Israel, and there's reservists everywhere. I remember swimming at a beautiful spring in the desert, the Negev desert in the south down there, and seeing all these young, attractive Jewish men and women come up with their swimsuits on and pile up their M16s on the side of this outdoor pool to swim. There seems to be so many armed people in Israel. The fact that the Israelis let down their guard, turned a blind eye, and also they had 70% of their troops based in the West Bank, suppressing this uprising over the summer, in which they killed over 230 Palestinians this summer, protesting against Benjamin Netanyahu's efforts to go in there and create more settlements. So the IDF, the Israeli Defense Forces, were forced in another direction, and they didn't prepare for. They didn't have the imagination to prepare for Hamas flying over the wall in these paragliders, breaking through the wall with bulldozers, and having an armed force of that size.
And the boats too. They were
Rallying.
using boats as well to get in.
And boats. Yeah. And apparently Hamas trained in open for this operation in a small fake Jewish village they created. I mean, the IDF and Mossad and the Shin Bet really are going to have some real hard questions asked, as will Benjamin Netanyahu, who was in charge of the whole thing. The buck stops with him.
Let me ask the response from Israel. I know the initial response obviously was chaotic. I know that reading reports that it took 6, 8 longer hours for Israeli military to respond to the attacks. And they're still, as we record this, I know they're still having small skirmishes in some villages in Israel, although most of them have been repelled, but they're still dealing with that. The Israeli response, you've got hostages, they seem to be doing a lot of missiles, but I know that as we record, they're also massing troops on the outside of the Gaza Strip too right now for a possible, invasion.
Yeah, last report I saw was that Israelis have dropped over 6,000 bombs on the Gaza Strip since the outbreak of the violence. It is a hard mission ahead of the IDF. We felt this kind of warfare when we fought against Iraqi Zarqawi insurgents in Fallujah, this city in Iraq in 2004. The Russians felt it in Grozny, Chechnya, in the mid-1990s and late 2000s. The Iraqi forces did this when they recaptured Mosul. It is going to be difficult. I worry about the fate of those over 100 hostages, including American hostages, by the way.
Mm-hmm.
I would not be surprised, based on my own study of ISIS. Hamas seems to be duplicating ISIS warfare. It's barbarity, it's savagery. They've never done this before. This is taking a page out of the ISIS manual. I would not be surprised if those hostages by now have suicide vests on them to blow them up in case someone tries freeing them. If they're scattered around the place in my IED-laced warrens and tunnels, we've seen people disappear into Gaza before. 3 Israelis disappeared in 2014, and they didn't come out. So it is an ultimate nightmare for counterterrorism force to try going in to an urban battlefield, an urban forest, an urban warren, to try flushing out entrenched insurgents who might turn houses into IEDs, house-bound improvised explosive devices, tripwire whole streets, sniper nests, ambushing them from tunnels and disappearing again. You need a 3-to-1 advantage to win offensive warfare anyways.
And it's a good,
when it comes to urban combat.
As we talked about at the start, it's such a condensed area to begin with, which it even makes it more difficult.
All right, you're talking about an area the size of 2 Washington, D.C.s here, only far more compact, more like the compact density you find in a town like Manhattan or Shanghai or Tokyo. So, this is no commander wants to have his infantry dismounted, walking in these open streets, exposed to snipers and IEDs. Urban warfare is the ultimate nightmare of any army, but especially when you're up against an army that, like ISIS or now Hamas, who's following ISIS, that is suicidally dedicated to destroying you.
Is Israel worried about any battles now coming from the West Bank?
I think West Bank has been pretty quiescent for the last few days. The biggest worry for Israel right now is a second front opening from the north. North of Israel, you have the country of Lebanon, and the strongest fighting force in Lebanon is the Iran-backed Shia group known as Hezbollah, the Party of God. In the past, they have coincided and planned attacks with Hamas, even though Hamas is Sunni. The big worry is that Hezbollah will start raining missiles, Iranian-supplied missiles down onto the Israeli Golan Heights or towns in northern Israel, perhaps send raiding parties across the border into Israel and try to distract the IDF from waging this war in the Gaza Strip against Hamas, who are their allies.
Do you see, and again, we've got a few minutes left here, but I want a couple of things. What does the United States, or what do you think the United States does right now to help in that in the situation? Do you find them getting involved? I know that obviously Israel's looking for military assistance, not people, but military assistance. What's the U.S. response?
Well, the Biden administration and both the Democrats and Republicans, even though the Republican House doesn't have a leader, which means they can't really act due to the overthrow of Kevin McCarthy by the right-wing Republicans, the Americans are, of course, unified in this issue even more so than the defense of another democracy, Ukraine. I don't know why Republicans are selective. Some of them, that is. America won't get involved in any ground conflicts. We might, though, help them with Navy SEALs, SEAL Team 6 or Delta forces, who might be able to go in and help do some hostage rescuing in Gaza. Certainly, we sent an aircraft carrier fleet there to the shores off of Israel as a threat to Hezbollah. Should these Iranian-backed proxies, Hezbollah, who operate in Lebanon, start launching offensives against Israel in the north, the Biden administration has threatened to bomb them. So we can help them with that sort of air support and also with resupply. It's going to take a lot of ammunition to rearm the Iron Dome system, these sensors like the Patriot anti-aircraft batteries that have been depleted by firing so much munition to destroy all of these 4,000 to 5,000 Hamas Katyusha rockets that have come in and mortars. So they'll need resupply. And of course, diplomatically, America is on the side warning countries like Iran, Lebanon, not to get involved. So, we are the big brother of Israel. We're its closest ally, always have been, especially going back to the beginning of this relationship between American fundamentalists under Reagan, who believe that Israel is a holy state and we need to support it so that we have, the Armageddon, basically, the return of Jesus Christ.
And I know that the battle group, the Gerald R. Ford battle group, has moved into the Mediterranean to provide assistance if necessary, if required by the Biden administration. I'm curious here, how does this war impact what's going on in Ukraine? And I know we got like 5 minutes left, but can you sort of summarize what you think, how this impacts what's going on in Ukraine?
Yeah, I'm sure it is not the thing that President Zelensky wanted right now. The last thing they want is to see a diversion of efforts as we have this slow grinding war attrition offensive in Ukraine. They're trying to break through and get to the Black Sea and cut off Russia's land bridge to Crimea. They're fighting in a much greater battle for their life than Israel. Israel had a one-day incursion over 22 villages, and it was repulsed within hours. They're not up against the sort of threat that Ukraine is. Ukraine's fighting a war for survival, and they desperately need American support. And sadly, Matt Gaetz, the guy who overthrew the speaker, Kevin McCarthy, and some of these real hardcore right-wing people who are under Trump's influence, have voted to not supply weaponry to Ukraine and let it fall. They need that weaponry so bad, especially the artillery. They're burning through artillery so fast right now, and the Russians have still outgunned them 10-1. They desperately need American support. And this faction in the Republican Party that overthrew the speaker and almost caused a shutdown of the government, they forced the Republican moderates and right-wingers who supported Ukraine and Israel, and they forced the Republican Democrats to stop aid for Ukraine right when they need it to try pushing this advantage through before winter comes. So it's a hard time for Ukraine right now with this right-wing group in the Republican Party potentially cutting off their lifeline for ammunition. But I think they stand fully. The Ukrainian government has come out in support of Israel, even though Israel has not really supplied them with weaponry, because they see Israel as under a threat by a terrorist force, much like the state-sponsored terrorist force that's been rampaging through eastern Ukraine ever since February of last year, slaughtering and burning and killing and doing much the same things to Ukrainians that Hamas did to these poor 1,200 Israeli civilians who were butchered by these Hamas terrorists.
Well, there's a lot to get through, and we appreciate you coming on to explain it for us. It's always good seeing you, and I do thank you for sort of explaining things, simplifying things for our viewers as well. So thank you again for making yourself available, and we will chat with you soon, I'm sure.
It's always a pleasure, Jim. Thanks again for having me on, and I'll keep the people of Ukraine and Israel in my thoughts and prayers. And thanks for having me on.
That's going to do it for this edition of A Conversation With. I'm Jim Marshall of the New Bedford Cable Network. Thanks for watching, and we'll talk to you again soon.